All right, friends. We'll get started and let people trickle in as we are doing so. A little bit of a chant. So for these purposes, I so miss singing together with other people, but singing together unmuted on Zoom, as I'm sure many of you have experienced, really doesn't work. So we're not going to try it. I ask you all to make sure that you are muted, though if you are willing, I encourage you to turn on your video so that we can feel like we are at least to some extent in community together. And I'm going to share my screen so that we can look at the lyrics together. If you have been to synagogue, particularly on any Chag, you may be familiar with this song. So we are singing the chant at the top of this sheet. Min ha-metzar karati ya, anani v'merchav, out of the really constricted, difficult spaces, I have called out to Yah, to Hashem, and I have been answered from the expanse. If you know this, sing with me. We'll sing for a few minutes. If you don't know this, you may by the time we're done singing. Min ha-metzar karati ya, anani v'merchav ya, min ha-metzar karati ya, anani v'merchav ya, anani, anani, anani. V'merchav ya, anani, 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 v'merchav ya, min ha-metzar karati ya, anani, v'merchav ya, min ha-metzar karati ya, anani v'merchav ya, anani, anani, anani v'merchav ya, anani, anani, anani v'merchav ya, min ha-metzar karati ya, anani v'merchav ya, min ha-metzar karati ya, anani v'merchav ya, anani, anani, anani v'merchav ya, anani, anani, anani v'merchav ya. We're going to sing this a few more times. And as we sing, I invite you to think about a time when you felt like you were in a really difficult, anxious, frightening place, and what it felt like the moment, or when you realized, maybe it wasn't one moment, that you were no longer in that space. Or if you feel currently like you are in a difficult, anxious, constricting, frightening space, what the relief that perhaps you yearn for would feel like. So let's bring that emotion to singing this through a couple more times. Min ha-metzar karati ya, anani v'merchav ya, min ha-metzar karati ya, Anani v'merchavya, Anani, Anani, Anani v'merchavya, Anani, Anani, Anani v'merchavya, min hametzar karatia, Anani v'merchavya, min hametzar karatia, Anani v'merchavya, Anani, Anani, Anani v'merchavya, Anani, Anani, Anani v'merchavya. Down. So I invite you to share in the chat if you don't want to unmute and speak out loud, though you can unmute and speak out loud. We're still a fairly small group. What associations, if any, does that chant bring up for you? And if you don't already have associations with that particular song, what does it mean to sing about being in the depths and then finding an answer in the expanse? Those are big questions, but you can offer me like even just a one-word association.
Hi, I'm Marion from Houston. So when I'm ever singing in a Jewish phrase, and I myself have been, a 3-time flood survivor, and there's fears and things, my warrior person always takes over. But when I hear this song, it's uplifting when I repeat it to myself, because it doesn't have a doomsday sound. It has a sound of lightness, lifting up your heart almost, even if I didn't know what the Hebrew words meant. It comes like this, like a tree in my space.
Thank you for those beautiful images, Marian. Uplift and sort of blossoming out like a tree. Maybe you said sometimes you feel that warrior self being activated, but this maybe calms that. Okay. Any other associations anyone wants to share?
I'm Emily from Eugene, and I realized for the first time that this song makes me think of the 12-step program. One of the steps is you're supposed to turn it over to God when you're having difficulty, and I've done that, and usually I get some kind of relief, and it's interesting to make that association.
Great, thank you. It's that sense of being able to be held by something larger, turn your burdens over to something else. Well, I'm going to continue our discussion forward. Yes, wonderful. People are welcome to share in the chat if you have additional associations, and I see that Judy has, though I will continue our discussion forward. So this, I was very tickled by the association of the Big Bold Jewish Climate Fest being this extended weekend and the focus on Tu B'Shvat, which is entirely appropriate. Tu B'Shvat kicked off the Big Bold Jewish Climate Fest, and it is also Parashat V'Shalach. which is the parasha in which our ancestors are transformed from slaves in Egypt, as we often say, to free people, servants of Hashem. It's this ultimate redemption. And they sing this amazing song at the sea. We'll be singing a chant from it a little bit later. But it is also this very scary, uncertain moment. And so I want us to take a look at what happens with the Song of the Sea and actually contextualizing where the Israelites are and in their journey when this happens. So I'm going to share my screen again for us to study this text. And if someone would be willing to read so that I'm not doing so much of the talking, please do unmute yourself and just say, I'll do it. And that would be great. We're reading from Exodus 15, 20 to 24, which is the very end of the Song of the Sea. Exodus 15, 1 to 19 is the long form poem with lots of anthropomorphic imagery about Hashem's might, devastating the enemy. And now we come to the final line of the Song of the Sea and what happens next. So can I have a volunteer who's willing to unmute and do some reading for us?
I will.
Thank you.
I have to blank myself off pretty soon. Okay. Then Miriam the prophetess, Aaron's sister, took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out after her and danced with timbrels. And Miriam chanted for them, "Sing to Hashem, for God has triumphed gloriously. Horse and driver he has hurled into the sea." Then Moses caused Israel to set out from the Sea of Reeds. They went on into the wilderness of Shur. They traveled 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. They came to Marah, but they could not drink the water of Marah because it was bitter. That is why it was named Marah. And the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?"
Thank you for reading, Julie. And I want to make a note about translation. I usually gender neutralize God pronouns when I am translating biblical text. The Song of the Sea is very clearly talking about an anthropomorphized warrior man God. So it felt odd to me to attempt to gender neutralize that when that connotation is there, hence the horse and driver he has hurled into the sea. I'm not attempting to reflect my own theology here, but the theology that it seems like our biblical ancestors were pretty clearly evoking in this song. So that aside, what are we looking at here? What happens after the Song of the Sea? The Israelites have drowned, or the Israelites have crossed the sea. The Egyptians have drowned. There's been this miraculous deliverance. They have sung their amazing song, and
then it sucks.
And then it sucks. Thank you, Becky. Exactly. It's not like this one-time redemption and then everything's okay and we feel great and we're all harmonious. We immediately start wandering in a terrifying wilderness where we don't know where there's going to be water. And in fact, we find water and it's not potable. And we are terrified and we're complaining and making trouble because we're scared. So I think this is a very important piece of context of the Song of the Sea, because even in the moment that the Israelites are singing the song, they know they are facing an unfamiliar wilderness, and yet they still sing the song. This is in contrast to stories. I don't know how many of you have heard this sort of folktale about two people walking through the split waters and looking down and looking at each other and complaining, "Oh my gosh, it's so muddy. Oh, what is that noise? What is this awful din and the humidity? And ugh, gross. I hope we find an oasis soon where I can take a bath because I just feel filthy. This is disgusting." And they are so busy complaining about the mud on their shoes and the discomfort of the walk, that they fail to look up and notice that they are literally walking through a miracle. So I want to bring this home to a discussion about us. I had a conversation with a colleague, a close friend, a rabbi of another synagogue in the Pacific Northwest on the Saturday after the election in November. Some of you may, I didn't talk to him on the Saturday. I talked to him on Sunday, and we were talking about his experience of the Saturday. Some of you may remember that the Saturday was the day that the election was officially called. And I don't want to presume about anyone's politics on this call. However, my colleague was quite happy about the results of the presidential election. And he described going downtown to the site of a rally in the city where he lives. And he said, and the mood was dour. One person after another got up and talked about how Biden is not going to make the change we need and how we are going to need to continue to fight so hard for the changes that we need. And, you know, and corporations are still in control and the military industrial complex is still in control and nothing's been done about climate change and we shouldn't celebrate right now. And my colleague said, and this really struck me, for one day after the current administration has been defeated, I just wanted a band. Could we just have had a band for a moment? And to me, it is this tension in this story, and which reflects the tension in the text we just looked at about the end of the Song of the Sea, which is this tension of knowing how much difficult work there is to be done, and yet, can we celebrate overcoming something really difficult? Which is the tension that is, I hope, animating our time together right now. And I hope is a tension that activists can continue to hold and perhaps get better at navigating, as we all have to continue to fight for, you know, we're here for the big, bold Jewish Climate Fest, sponsored by Hazon. So I presume we all have some stake in working for a better future that is going to be hard to get to and that we have not yet achieved. And yet, how can we have our band, as my colleague said, and still celebrate together? So I'm going to pause right now and just invite folks to share a little bit of reflection if anyone would like to.
I'm happy to share. I so appreciate that story because I was with a friend about a week ago and she and I are both very happy about the inauguration and election outcomes. And she was participating, and she told me the story of she had been participating in an online yoga, meditation, something or other. And she was so excited and she got that reaction in that group. And these people said like, oh, this isn't hardly anything and da da da. And my friend was the only non-person of color in that group, and it was essentially shared with her, that's just because you're white that you can feel this excited about this. And I said to her, well, I'm white and I'll celebrate with you. I'm very happy. And I feel that, but I felt this, like, I totally hear what they're saying. I couldn't agree more that whatever happens now is fantastic and not going to be enough. And we need more, whatever, but I didn't. And so I was having this second guessing sense of like, is this wrong of me to be happy right now? And is this just because I'm privileged that I can be happy right now? And so I feel validated by that, like, maybe it's Jewish that I'm happy right now.
Maybe it is. And I you know, and just to complicate that reflection, in my experience, at least, so I'm based in Eugene, Oregon, in the Pacific Northwest, which, you know, mythologically and actually is predominantly very, very white. And in my experience, it's a lot of like white radicals who are just all about like, it's all or nothing and we can't celebrate until we have all. So I don't know that the naysaying belongs to any particular group. But I think that, right, it speaks to a lot of us have this experience with this tension of, can we celebrate the victory that is not enough? How can we celebrate the victory that is not enough? And perhaps a fear that if we do, it will distract us from the ultimate victory towards which we need to be striving.
And it makes me think about behavioral psychology too. They certainly say, like, if you're going to stick to a diet or an exercise program, for example, you have to celebrate that you went to the gym that day, even if you haven't met your goal of how much weight you can lift or how far you can run or whatever it is, that to celebrate those steps and victories along the way, or else you're just going to give up. Like, just behavioral psychology wise, they say celebrate that.
Totally. So we are going to now take a look at a very particular example of how our Jewish tradition encourages, pushes us towards that celebration of the incomplete victory. I am going to share with you, well, so here's the question. We're going to do a little more text study and discussion. So many of you have been muted and video off this whole time. It's a little hard for me to tell, how many people are actually here. I would encourage us to do this in small breakout rooms, so there is an opportunity for a little bit more face-to-face, everybody getting to talk discussion. But if people would prefer to stay in the whole group, I will respect that. So I'm about to launch a poll about what your preference is. It should appear in front of your face. Let me know if you want to stay in the whole group or if you are excited to go into small breakout rooms and have a little bit more intimate discussion.
How long will the small groups be?
The small groups would be about 10 minutes and we will come back together.
Okay.
Okay, not everyone has filled out the poll, but staying together as a whole group has won by an unsurmountable landslide. So that is what we will do. So I am going to share with you the text sheet. I'm both going to screen share, and I am putting in the chat the link so that you can download this text sheet on your own time and go through it at your own pace. If you would like, feel free to click on that link and refer to it now or later. And we're going to look at the second side of this text sheet. A text that I think will be extremely familiar, although perhaps never studied in depth to all of us. So please sing along with me. We'll mute us all for a moment. Dayenu, 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 Dayenu. So we've probably participated in some discussion, maybe not all of us, about the word Dayenu and what it means. It would have been enough. And this text is an excerpt. It's not the entire litany, but an excerpt of the litany of Dayenu as it appears in the Passover Haggadah. So when we sing the song, we are just singing a few verses, usually in Hebrew, which probably many of us don't understand. But those verses are part of a larger litany making a claim that we're going to go into a little bit right now. So can I have a volunteer who would be willing to read this litany for us?
God. If God had only taken us out of Egypt, it would have been enough for us. If God had taken us out of Egypt and had not given us money, it would have been enough for us. If God had given us money and had not split the sea for us, it would have been enough. If God had split the sea for us and had not taken us through it on dry land, it would have been enough for us. If God had taken us through it on dry land and had not pushed down our enemies in the sea, it would have been enough for us. If God had pushed down our enemies in the sea and had not supplied our needs in the wilderness for 40 years, it would have been enough for us. If God had supplied our needs in the wilderness for 40 years and had not fed us the manna, it would have been enough for us. If God had fed us the manna and had not given us the Shabbat, it would have been enough for us. If God had given us the Shabbat and had not brought us close to Mount Sinai, it would have been enough for us. If God had brought us close to Mount Sinai and had not given us the Torah, it would have been enough for us. If God had given us the Torah and had not brought us into the land of Israel, it would have been enough for us.
Thank you so much for reading, Asher. Just noticing, okay, what's in the chat. So I don't know. So how many of you have studied this text in depth before? You can just give me a wave of your hands. Great. How many of you are sort of paying attention to the content of this text in depth for the first time? One or two people. Great. So let's talk about, is this text true? Or what other responses you have to seeing this text? I'll screen share it again so you can take a look.
I kind of don't believe them.
I'm sorry, are you finished?
Yeah.
Okay, as I read this and I think about it as both a parent and as someone who's been kicking around for the last several decades, sometimes there's a lot of wisdom in not giving everyone everything that they need in one package. Here are all your needs met. It does create a certain fearfulness or dependency. And sometimes it's important to get a little bit of what you need and then figure out on your own how to get the rest of it. So I see this kind of tension here in this piece. I mean, there are many ways of interpreting this. And I think the core meaning is that the freedom alone was enough and everything else was just the icing on the cake. But I do feel that there has to be, in any functioning individual and in any functioning community, this tension between individual self-actualization and community responsibility. And that's one of the things I like about Judaism, is that there are always these tensions, contradictions built into it. It keeps life complicated when life is complicated anyway. But.
Great. Oh, thank you, Adrienne. What a great insight. And particularly this piece about how we're not ready for everything all at once.
Right.
We can't go from slavery to Sinai or slavery to self-determination in our own land in a heartbeat. Like, the journey actually functions. I too am a parent to very young children, and I am learning, like thank goodness I don't need to be a parent to a teenager until I have been a parent for 12 years. And by the time I have been a parent for 12 years, I will probably be better prepared to be a parent to a teenager. It's a little bit of a silly association, but so yes, great point. I did see that there were some other responses to this text, so let's invite a few other associations.
It makes me wonder what it would have been enough means. Like, does this mean that we would have found a way to survive, that things could have kept going until the next point? As I kind of read some of these, I'm like, well, like, it seems like that would be the stopping point. Like, how would we be here today? I have trouble imagining that, but maybe it means that there's other possible ways that story could have gone, and we would have found a way to keep going and been sustained by what we had been given.
Totally right. So bringing this skepticism, which I think, Becky, you also said, like, there are certain points in this litany that are just, factually a little hard to wrap our minds around. If God had brought us out of Egypt, but the sea had not split, according to the narrative of the story, we would have been slaughtered or pulled back into slavery by the Egyptians, right? If we had gone through the sea, but our needs in the wilderness and the manna had not been provided, like presumably according to the narrative of the story, we would have starved to death in the wilderness. So, it's not to say that we didn't need any of these things to happen. And yet with each step, we are still singing Dayenu. It would have been enough.
Well, I think that what amazes me is that I've never seen this full version or this particular version. I've only seen if God had taken us out of Egypt, it would have been enough. If God had just given us Shabbat, it would have been enough. If God had given us the Torah, it would have been enough. And I've never seen this kind of detail before. And it just makes me pause to wonder. Well, that there's quite a difference between the abbreviated version and this version.
Yes, and this too is an abbreviated version. I want to be clear.
Yes.
You can find any traditional Haggadah, it will have even more verses that I left out, in part because they're a little more complicated. It's like more graphic about all the killing of the Egyptians, which maybe for our progressive sensibilities, like we don't feel like we needed that. I think it's so I brought in some ways only the most uncomplicated verses. Sarah writes in the text in the chat something that I think is really important. Maybe the question is enough for what? It would not have been enough to survive, enough to celebrate, enough to be grateful. And I do think that is where the Haggadah is pointing us, right? The Israelites sing the song at the sea. Ashir Ladonai ki ga'ol ga'asus v'ramav. We give thanks to God. Horse and rider he is cast into the sea. Because they have this experience, we have this memory of miraculous deliverance, right? Horse and rider is like, I mean, we probably think about this in a little bit more of a like, oh no, like the poor horses, which is also important, but like it's important to remember pre-modern imagination, horse and rider is like the scariest weapon you can imagine. A pedestrian peasant seeing a war horse and rider coming at them, like knows they are dead. And so the Israelites, so this experience of the horses and riders coming at us and then they are thrown into the sea is this miracle that doesn't negate the fact that we are still facing 40 years of wandering in the desert and we don't know how we're going to get food and we don't know where we're going to wind up. And so we pause and we sing the song at the sea. And what I love about the Dayenu text is the suggestion that like maybe there should be a song for every step of this journey. I'm going to pause because the light in my office turns off every half hour unless I move. All right, I am back.
One of the things that's coming, sorry, I didn't want to.
Oh no, I was just going to read what's in the chat, but go ahead, Becky.
A lot of the talk in the climate movement is around the target goals. How much reduction by what year? Is it 50% by 2035, 100% by 2040? And a lot of conversation about, is that fast enough or not? And I was on a lobbying call recently with, no, not a lobbying call, it was a presentation at my synagogue with a local state legislator. And there's conversations here about shutting down the remaining coal plants in Colorado. And people were saying, you know, we need them shut, you know, yesterday. And he was saying, well, I also know that we need the communities that rely on that for their jobs and for their sales tax income and hence their libraries and their schools and their roads and their firefighters and everything need time to adjust. And like similarly here, like saying, we can't just go from slavery to freedom overnight and be like, great, we're here. Like there's real needs for transition. So even though we absolutely do need to pull out of coal and quickly, it's so myopic to only think about that one thing and say, well, why is that? Well, because we want healthy community and people thriving. Well, like if everybody loses their job overnight and don't have time to retrain or transfer to another industry, that's not an ending that we want either. And so all that's coming up for me through this.
Totally. And the thing that actually struck me most about what you just said, Becky, is that comment about we need it to end yesterday. Right? So if we needed something to end yesterday and it didn't end, the implication is then no matter what happens going forward, there's nothing to celebrate because we already failed. And, you know, to bring it down very clearly to this moment, there is so much writing coming out about climate issues, about the targets that we have already failed to meet, about the change that is already irrevocable, about what is already lost, which, as far as I can tell, winds up just being a cop-out and an excuse for despair because we've already failed. So what's the point of trying anymore? So the challenge, I think both in the conversation you're describing, Becky, but also in any of our work moving forward, is how do we integrate the grief for what is already lost with the celebration, the determination to achieve what can still be achieved, and the celebration as we do along the journey for these incomplete victories. One thing we really don't talk about much, and Torah doesn't even talk about much, because we go at the end of Bereshit, the end of Genesis, with the death of Jacob, to the beginning of the Exodus story in the book of Exodus, is 400 years in slavery, right? So like by the time the redemption comes, it is too late. It needed to come yesterday for the people living in year 200 of 400 years in slavery. And I think in a lot of issues we might be talking about, whether it's racial justice, economic justice, environmental justice, climate change, there is this weighty truth that the change that we need should have come yesterday, should have come 100 years ago. And so, and yet we have this tradition that instructs us and we still get to celebrate. We still get to say Dayenu. We still get to sing and be grateful when we have a victory, even if it is an incomplete victory.
And if you want to work on shoulds, you can say this is a change that never should have happened because there shouldn't have been the slavery in the first place, if you want to keep going back.
Exactly. And I'm appreciating another comment Judy just wrote in the chat about, too much, too little, too late is not a helpful conversation, though it is the conversation we get caught in frequently. So I am suggesting that the Dayenu conversation is an alternative. The Dayenu framing is an alternative to the too much, too little, too late discourse. Did anyone else want to say something before we continue, before I move the conversation forward a little? Okay, I'm feeling very, very intensely the weight of our time. So there is a beautiful quote by Rebecca Solnit from her book, Hope in the Dark. And I'm typing the name of the book here in the chat because if you are feeling inspired by this conversation, one of the great ways to carry that inspiration forward would be to read this book. She talks, it's really a study in all the incomplete victories and all the ways that we don't know how the changes we try to make will ripple out. But this one line paragraph that I really love, that to me really speaks to what Dayenu is doing. So another volunteer to read, please.
Is it where it says a victory, a victory?
Yes.
A victory doesn't mean that everything is now going to be nice forever, and we can therefore all go lounge around and until the end of time. Some activists are afraid that if we acknowledge victory, people will give up the struggle. I've long been more afraid that people will give up and go home, or never get started in the first place if they think no victory is possible, or fail to recognize the victories already achieved. Marriage equality is not the end of homophobia, but it's something to celebrate. A victory is a milestone on the road, evidence that sometimes we win, and encouragement to keep on going, not to stop.
Thank you for reading. So she's defining a victory as what we might say is a Dayenu moment.
Mm-hmm.
Not like it's enough to be done, but it's enough to praise. It's enough to celebrate. So I invite you to reflect. I think for the sake of our introverts and internal processors, we are gonna take a minute of silence, and people can jot down their own thoughts before I encourage you to answer these questions. And I'm writing these questions in the chat. When has it been challenging for me or for the movement I care about to notice and celebrate small victories? What would help me make a practice of doing so, of noticing and celebrating small victories? And how would doing so affect my activism or my capacity for activism? So I'm gonna check my watch and just everybody do a little bit of meditating to yourselves about those questions before I ask anyone to share your own thoughts. All right, if anyone wants to share a thought about any of these questions, I invite you to do so. Either in the chat or out loud. Okay, then I'm going to try another question. It is an odd time, arguably, to be asking this question after 4 years of the Trump administration climate denialism. But what victories can you think of that the climate movement has had in these past 4 years that are worth celebrating? And sort of pushing against the narrative that it has all been 4 years that are worse than lost. Please, Becky.
There's a great new collection of essays out called All We Can Save. And there's an essay in there from, I think someone with the Sierra Club, but it was about how many coal plants have closed down in the last 4 years, and so many of them ahead of schedule. And that was with not the winds at their back at all. In fact, the wind in their faces, and just kind of showing. It reminded me once, Michael Pollan, I heard him speak once, and he said, when I say something's not sustainable, I don't mean like poetically or like whatever. He's like, I literally mean dictionary definition, it cannot sustain. And a lot of these things that are unsustainable, they will end of their own accord. If we can get our act together, we can end them before they end of their own accord, but they will eventually end of their own accord. And that was, to me, a very good example of that when you had a president saying, I'm going to keep coal alive, go coal, and we even accelerated closures, huge victories there.
Excellent. Yes. Things that are unsustainable no longer being sustained, no longer sustaining themselves. There's a lot happening in the chat about just the increase in consciousness about climate change in these last 4 years. Thanks, Asher and Naomi, for typing this website in for people to check out. This is, I think, what Becky was just referencing, All We Can Save. There is a youth climate movement that is gathered world attention, global attention, led by Greta Thunberg and so many others. Anyone else want to share any reflection? Well, I would encourage, local victories. People are talking about local victories. Great.
It seems like a lot of the chats are going just to you rather than the whole group. So we're not seeing a lot of the ones you're referring to, I think.
Oh, they do say to everyone. Do you have your chat window open, Becky?
Yeah, you were referring to things that I wasn't seeing, but maybe they're scrolling up too fast for me. Sorry.
Okay. So I would just suggest this might be a thing to practice noticing and being grateful and celebrating. So I did promise a little bit more song, so we're going to try that.
I just have a comment to make about
please, Emily.
That what's interesting is here in Oregon, we've been fighting the Jordan Cove terminal for the pipeline, and also the pipeline that's supposed to go from Canada to Texas or Louisiana. There were some victories in the last 4 years, and then they were taken away. And it's very interesting because the day of the inauguration, of the next day, there was another victory for Jordan Cove to stop it at a federal level. And there was also, in the pipeline, of course, the president said, I'm taking away the pipeline. So there were these victories that came and then they went, and it was hard to sustain energy around it because you saw the victory taken away. But now, just as soon as Biden gets in, these victories are more on a permanent level. So that's interesting to reflect on.
Thank you. Emily's referring to the Jordan Cove pipeline. Jordan Cove is a small town on the Oregon coast, and the pipeline she's referring to is a pipeline that was proposed that would cut across most of southern Oregon as a liquid natural gas pipeline. Local environmental activists have been fighting it.
And the one in Montana, too.
And Montana, since before the Trump administration.
And during and after. No.
Yeah. And GM's announcement that they'll transition to electric vehicles, awesome. Major fossil fuels divestment victories, awesome. So there is what to celebrate. And I think Emily just spoke to a really important piece about this, which is celebrating doesn't mean that the victory is permanent. And I think I'm just reading what Alex just wrote in the chat. I think that really speaks to our challenge. In a moment of uncertainty, it is so hard to know what to celebrate. And yet this is the moment when we might need to also be able to ground ourselves firmly in the balance of this tension between the work that needs to be done and our right to notice evolution, to acknowledge gratitude, to acknowledge that things have been worse, could be worse again, but for now, whether it's we're holding the line, we've gotten through the sea, there is something worth celebrating. So I want to suggest, I don't know what relationship any of you have particularly to Shabbat, but I want to point out those of you who are congregants at the synagogue I serve, Temple Beth Israel, apologies, you've heard me say this many, many times, but I want to point out the opening of the Psalm for Shabbat. Mizmor Shir Liyom HaShabbat, the psalm, the song of the Sabbath day, Tov lahodot l'Adonai, Ulezamer l'shimcha elyon. The song of the Sabbath day is that it is good to praise. It is good to give thanks. And I'm not particularly attached to the theology of whether you believe in Adonai as a particular destination of your thanks and praise, or something else, or your own efforts. The point is that 6 days a week we are commanded to work and to strive and to make the world a better place. And part of the essence of Shabbat is that on a weekly basis we notice what is right with the world. And we give thanks for that. So I invite you to mute yourselves, and we'll just sing this a little bit in honor of Shabbat this evening. This is a tune that comes from Beit HaTfilah in Tel Aviv. Mizmor shir leyom HaShabbat, Mizmor shir leyom HaShabbat, Mizmor shir leyom HaShabbat, Mizmor shir leyom HaShabbat. Tov lehodot l'Adonai, ולזמר לשמך עליון, להגיד בבוקר חסדך, ואמונתך בלילות. מזמור שיר ליום השבת, מזמור שיר ליום השבת, מזמור שיר ליום השבת, מזמור שיר ליום השבת. טוב להודות לאדוני, ולזמר לשמך עליון, להגיד בבוקר חסדך, ואמונתך בלילות. מזמור שיר ליום השבת, מזמור שיר ליום השבת, מזמור שיר ליום השבת, מזמור שיר ליום השבת. Our time is winding to a close, so I want to offer you two more metaphors before we close, and then I'll officially say we're done. And then, in case you have a 10 a.m. set, a 10 a.m. PST, 1 p.m. East Coast session that you're excited to get to, and I'll stay on to chat with anyone who wants to chat for a few minutes. This obligation mentioned in the Haggadah, that in each and every generation, each person is obligated to regard themselves as if they had personally gone forth from Egypt. And that means all of it: the experience of slavery, the experience of fear, the experience of redemption, the experience of wandering and uncertainty and not knowing what comes next or how we get to the destination. And the Haggadah says, and therefore we all give praise. And I think it is the holding all of that, the slavery, the redemption, the uncertainty, the awareness of possibility that animates what the Sfas Emes writes, early Hasidic master. There is an exodus in every generation. According to the need of that generation, all this was there at the moment of the first exodus. The more one has faith, as if one was redeemed from Egypt, the more the redemption is actually revealed, meaning the more we will feel that the present redemption, each of us, and I would add collectively, coming forth from our own struggles. So this redemption is not, as Rebecca Solnit says, a one-time thing that we then all get to take a break, indefinitely for the rest of our lives. It is an ongoing unfolding that if we can find ourselves inspired by the first redemption story, we can access and continue that unfolding in our own generation. So you're welcome to type response thoughts to that in the chat, but we will close with one last chant. This is from the Song at the Sea, and it is also in Psalm 118, which is in Hallel, which we recite like our first chant that we did when I started on the holidays. Ozi v'zimrat Yah v'yihili li shu'ah. Yah is my strength and my song, and will be salvation for me. So this reminder that we are not alone. We are held together, like Emily said, using the 12-step imagery. We are held together. We don't have to hold the burden all ourselves. So I invite you to sing with me this chant by Rabbi Shafa Gold. Ozi v'zimrat Yah v'yehili Yeshua. 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 So I bless us that we are able to find things to celebrate, that we remember to be inspired by our tradition, our formational, foundational story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, leaving Egypt, and go forth.